Back. We're certainly glad to have you.
Thank you.
We've got about an hour, and we talked about perhaps using at least the first half to talk about jobs and the economy. On our front page today, we have a story about the president calling, without too much detail so far, for a big job-creating, infrastructure-building project to get people back to work. I'm wondering if you think that's a good idea.
I haven't looked at it, but probably not. When government spends money, the decisions are made politically. We need more spending, but we need more spending in the private economy. People need to make business decisions on how to allocate their resources. And that's been our mistake. That's how we got into the trouble. The government got into the business of spending way too much money and borrowing too much money, and it was all misdirected. Our big problem is malinvestment, misdirected investments, and excessive investments. And so when government's directed, like they did in the housing, leads to bubbles. So I would say that even though you might be able to point to some short-term narrow benefit by channeling funds in there, where's he going to get the money?
Well, if it's for roads and bridges, and there are roads and bridges falling apart all over the country, isn't that a good use of public money?
But the big question is, where's he going to get the money? And he has no money. The country's broke, and the economy is weak. To just borrow more money when debt is the problem doesn't solve the problem of liquidating the debt. You can't liquidate debt, which is a necessity, by piling on more debt.
Define broke. I mean, we're still define broke. You've said that before, and yet no economist that I know of would agree with you that we're broke.
Well,
I mean, we're paying our bills. So how do you define broke?
Well, if we were a company and we had to pay all our bills, we don't have any money in the bank, so we're broke. And that's the problem. You demonstrate the problem. People don't want to admit it. That's why we're not getting anywhere, because you have to admit we're broke. And we don't have enough assets. If we had to pay off our debt, we have more debt. We have like 60, nobody even knows about our obligations, like $65 trillion worth of obligations. The unemployment rate is high and the income is crashing. And we can't pay our bills, so we're broke.
Well, we're paying our bills. We may be taking on a lot of debt.
But we're paying our bills by printing the money and further borrowing.
Right.
So we'll always pay the bills, but you don't pay it with real money. You just pay it with counterfeit money. But that's not paying a bill. That's cheating people.
Counterfeit money. How do you define counterfeit
Well, you
money?
just print it when you need it.
So it's not legal tender, so they're doing something illegal?
Well, unconstitutional. It's unconstitutional because it very clearly at the convention, the Constitutional Convention said, do not emit bills of credit, and that's paper money. Mm-hmm. Today it's not paper money, but it's computerized money, so it's illegal under the Constitution.
So how would we have paid for, say, World War II or any of the attacks on the country if we couldn't issue debt?
Well, maybe we wouldn't go to war quite so often.
Well,
but
we were attacked in that case.
We would have to borrow the money.
Okay. So it's okay to borrow?
Well, under the Constitution, you're allowed to borrow.
Okay.
But you're not allowed to print it.
All right.
There's a big difference.
So if
we're in our crisis because we are living beyond our means and we're depending on taxes. Can't tax anymore. Borrowing. We can't borrow anymore, so you have to print it.
But taxes are lower than they've been since the 1950s.
Not the rates, but the revenues are because the economy has collapsed because
and the rates
because of
are
the debt burden. The debt burden gives you collapse to the economy, so the revenues go down. It compounds it, but you can't solve that problem by spending more money and raising your debt. It's the debt burden that's killing us.
So you wouldn't raise any taxes to, say, the pre-Bush level or when Eisenhower's level or Reagan's level?
No. That's the problem. The government's been spending way too much, and the people have to spend the money because governments cause a misdirection, a malinvestment, and excessive debt. So they for years thought that the panacea was everybody should have a house. That's a noble goal. Who's against everybody having a house? So we print the money, create the credit, interest rates at 0% when the market says interest rates should have been 5%. Oh, there's a lot of savings. We'll have Community Reinvestment Act, force the banks to make bad loans in essence. There was a housing bubble. It was destined to collapse. But it's only the free market economists that recognize that, predicted it. But now, too often in Washington, they don't want to look at the people who predicted it and say that's how you have to solve the problem.
So back to the jobs. If the idea of a government-sponsored infrastructure building program isn't the way to deal with unemployment. What should the president be doing right now?
Lower the tax rate, bring capital back home, and have a strong currency. We've chased capital out. When you chase the capital out, the jobs go with it. So we issue the reserve currency of the world. We've had that privilege, and it's fun when you can issue money and you can buy stuff from overseas. But there's no reason to work if you can do that. So you buy cheap products from China, so the capital leaves the country. Strong currencies bring capital in. We have $1.5 trillion of profits overseas. Why should a corporation bring it back? Get charged 35% to bring their money back? They've already paid taxes. So instead they say, oh no, it's much easier. Government will spend it and the Federal Reserve will print it. It's a cycle that's ended. I mean, we've gone away with it for 40 years, but the big bubble has burst, and we're only at the beginning of the collapse of the bubble. I mean, the 08 till now is only the beginning of the change. We're in the doldrums now. The revenues are going to continue to go down, so we're in a catch-22.
But you say cut taxes. George Bush cut taxes dramatically, and the economy tanked. It was the worst job creation under any modern president.
Spending didn't get cut.
Reagan raised taxes. Clinton raised taxes. George H.W. Bush raised taxes. The economy did fine.
Well, why don't we tax them 80%?
Well, we did under Eisenhower. It was 90%.
Everybody. Why don't we tax everybody 80%? There'd be no economy.
No, I'm not advocating that. I'm just saying that your argument that cutting taxes, what is your evidence? What specific era or presidential term can you show had lower taxes than now?
Kennedy did a pretty good job. He lowered the tax rates and lowered revenues. So that was pretty good. But I would say the period of time, the period of economic growth was following the Civil War period up until we had the Federal Reserve, and there was 3% growth average over all this period of time. We had no tax, no income tax. So governments can't make decisions that you can make. You're the only one that can make this decision.
I can't defend the country.
So you would defense, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about...
well, he can't build a bridge
we're
or
talking
a highway.
we're talking about the entitlement system. No, the bridges, I argue the case. I mean, I never attack infrastructure. Matter of fact, what I say is there was one time that we were voting for this war going on, and I wanted to cut $1 billion. And I said, take $1 billion, put half toward the deficit, and put the other into our infrastructure. But you just can't add on. I mean, it makes no sense that debt is a solution to debt. The financing of the debt is not, we're not able to do it. And there's a pretty good rule that if the financing of our debt gets, for a country, once it gets over 40%, it's unsustainable. And that's why the markets are crashing. This is why the world's in shambles. But it's also in shambles because all currencies are backed by paper money, the dollar. And people are getting tired of it. And when they reject it, believe me, you're going to see some real fireworks. We've seen nothing yet coming because we're going to see a collapse of the dollar. We're going to see prices rapidly rising. And what's telling you that the only true measurement of a currency for thousands of years has been the relationship to gold. And gold is market money. And you can't say, oh, legal tender laws will force you to use depreciating currency. They can't overcome the natural law. And the market says that the dollar is losing value. In the 1970s, when they went off the gold standard, Nixon devalued the currency, went from $35 to $38, and then to $42. And we ushered in a decade of a devastating stagflation. High unemployment rates and high price increases, interest rates up to 21%, and he only did a little bit. Now, then gold was 1/35 of an ounce of gold, and now it's 1/1800th of an ounce of gold. Bad news. Very bad news, and there's no way you can repeal that economic law. It's been around too long. And also the economic law says paper money doesn't last. Who wants to go back and use the continental dollar? No backing. I mean, this faith in paper is to me just astounding, and you can't force people to use something that has no value. But you can fool people for a long time, but you can't fool the people forever.
Was Standard & Poor's correct in their downgrading of the credit
I think
rating?
they're irrelevant.
Why is everybody so freaked out about it?
Huh?
Why is everybody so freaked out about it if it's
Because
irrelevant?
people think it's important.
Yeah.
As long as they think it's important. But if they were worth their salt, they'd have warned us, as the free markets warned us for a decade, about the housing bubble. What did they warn us about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac? They never said a word. If you really want to, I mean, my personal assessment is the rating should be a lot lower, because the debt is not going to be paid. And this is a denial that we're not in real serious trouble, and that someday we're going to all of a sudden, pay our bills by raising taxes. That'll just destroy the economy if you raise taxes now. I mean, you need to repatriate our money. The money that's been overseas, why bring it back? $1.5 trillion? Why bring it back if we're going to sock them for 35% and they can stay overseas? And that's what corporations and business are doing.
But we don't really stock them for 35%, using GE as the example. But they're not atypical. The effective rate is much lower than that.
And this is true. This is always what countries do so they can get around it. But the other countries, it's much lower than they claim too. But our capital gains tax is 35.
No, 15. Capital gains.
No.
Corporate
Corporate tax.
But other countries claim the same thing too. But they get around it as well. So if you're comparing apples with apples, they're not absolute. You're right. But there's still reasons why they don't come back home.
You of course don't have to answer this, but do you personally keep your resources in gold? And if so, if it's gold stock, what faith do you have in that piece of paper?
Well, I put my money in American money, which is under the law is still American legal tender, and that is gold coins.
Oh, okay.
And that's legal tender. But if I use it, if you and I use it, we could go to jail.
Oh, that's
But if we don't use their paper, people there are some that want to practice using gold coins as legal tender. They've been charged with terrorism and counterfeiting. That's how insane this thing is. No, it's you buy American coins. I
wish I had.
August 15, 1971 was a big day in my economic life because I said they've embarked. I mean, this is going to lead to a disaster. And I started at that time, matter of fact, it was illegal to buy American coins up until 76, 75 or 76. But you could buy Mexican coins.
Right.
It was legal to buy Mexican coins. But $35 an ounce, it wasn't the worst thing to understand monetary history. Because now, what is if you'd have bought, we don't have 40-year bonds, but let's say we had a 40-year bond or a 30-year bond. Just think what a 30-year bond would be worth. What if you were saving in 1971 to send your kids through school, and you had $50,000, well, let's say school was $10,000. So you get your $10,000, and what's the cost of education today? $40,000. What if you'd have put it in a gold coin, you could have paid your school, and you would have had money left over. So now the laws of economics are much more powerful than the money manipulators. I moan and groan about the power of the central bank and all this stuff, but ultimately they don't have the power. And that's why the gold standard broke down, because they tried to say that the dollar has to be backed by $35 an ounce, but they keep printing money for all that stuff we were doing under Eisenhower and everybody else. So they knew it. Henry Hazlitt, a famous financial writer after World War II, said, this thing won't work. It's going to break down. And he was absolutely right. It broke down because you can't defy the law that said there's a relationship of $1 to gold at $35 an ounce and just keep increasing the supply of money. I mean, there's no way you can violate that law, only temporarily. But you have to use force. You have to say you must use the legal tender. But now we have silver dollars legal tender, gold dollars legal tender. Now these new silver ounces are legal tender.
Rick Perry says that Bernanke is almost treasonous
Treasonous, yeah.
for what he's done with printing money. Do you think he's treasonous?
No, I don't use those words. I think they're misinformed on monetary policy, and that's the more important thing. So I don't.
Do you think it was appropriate for him to say?
That's his business. That's his business. He evidently thought it was good politics, to say it. I don't know. I have never met the man, so I don't know what his monetary policy is. I'm not disappointed he addressed the Federal Reserve, but he doesn't address it the way I do it, because people like sometime for me to, and I challenged Bernanke, and I did Greenspan, but I don't attack them. I attack the system. Of money, the silliness of constantly creating new money when you need it. I mean, a grade school kid can understand this. Oh, you mean if the government needs money, they just print it and they create new money? I mean, the logic is so overwhelming that I cannot understand how people have put their trust into it, but they trust the force of government. Governmental legal tender laws will force these people to use it, and what it does is it eventually forces people into the underground economy, because when you see the further deterioration, people are going to come out and they'll survive with real money. It'll drive people into the underground economy, and they're going to use silver and gold coins. What will happen?
This morning you said that the free market can regulate things far better than regulators
Right.
in the government can, but using the gold industry as an example, is it just a sort of a byproduct of the free market where there are gold mines? Last year there were 400 children in Nigeria that died from lead poisoning downstream from a gold mine. Is that, and there are other, tuberculosis has been linked to it. Are those just natural byproducts of the free market system?
But I don't know the circumstances over there, but they obviously don't have property rights. The free market said you have no right to pollute a stream. So people who...
But who would protect that?
Who enforces that?
Well, it's the government. It has to enforce property rights. The role of the government is to enforce property rights and contracts, and So here it.
So the EPA should get involved?
No, you don't need EPA. That's just a bunch of bureaucrats serving the big industries. They protect certain industries against others. Regulations are written for the benefit of big companies. The FDA helps the drug companies. Medical care helps insurance companies. I mean, there's always...
So should we have no regulation at all and just let
by the market? By the market. If you live upstream and you dump sewer in your stream and you pollute my water, I should take you to court and make you quit.
So
I
you
should be able to get
me as an individual sue DuPont or BP?
I think you're touching on the problem. In the past, you had a collusion between the big corporations and government. I lived in Pittsburgh. Big government, big steel, and they city dumped their sewers in the river, and the corporations dumped their sewer in the river. And finally, it was cleaned up, but it had nothing to do with the EPA. It had to do with local ordinances and property rights. They said you can't do it anymore. But the bureaucracy in Washington is not the most successful way to do it. We would have, if you'd have had a strict understanding of property rights during the Industrial Revolution, you wouldn't have had such a disaster. But it was the corporations and big business that work together, and that's what you have to break up.
So do you agree with Mitt Romney that corporations are people?
I don't understand that big discussion, but no, but people have rights. Corporations, they have contractual arrangements, but corporations as people, as a person has a personal right. That is not true. But if you're a person, you have rights. All rights are individuals, not by a group. And the corporation is set up as a contract. The contract then becomes important, and the government has an involvement in enforcing contracts, so it would be handled that way. But I think I don't quite understand the discussion about whether corporations are people or not. I mean, people create corporations by contract. The contract is what is important.
I thought there was a pretty remarkable moment in that Ames debate from last week where you and all the other candidates were asked about this 10-to-1 deal. Would it be a good deal if you could get $10 in spending cut for every $1 in revenue or taxes? And to a person, you all said, that's a terrible deal. No, wouldn't take it.
Because you can't trust the people who want to cut. It's not the contract. The only thing that counts is your first year. You raise taxes this year, then nobody's obligated to cut spending next year. It's never been done. Ronald Reagan was so
So
disappointed.
you just wouldn't trust the Congress to do it, is the point?
No, I wouldn't trust, no, they wouldn't do it. They haven't. There's no example of ever fulfilling it. And Reagan, in his memoir, said that he was really, really naive because he said, I'd raise the taxes and I'm going to get 3 to 1. He didn't get it. He was just totally naive. He was a good guy and hopeful, but he said that they really, played nasty tricks on him. So the tax cuts amplified the problem because they didn't have any spending cuts. And of course, nobody wants.
Because of defense, largely.
Yeah,
He was
because
afraid of cutting defense.
yeah, well, that's still the problem today. Democrats and Republicans, they don't want to touch it. And we have an empire, that if you don't deal with it, you can't touch this problem. Great countries are brought to their knees because they go empire building. And we've been embarked on this quite a few years now. It started really with Woodrow Wilson, and but especially since World War II, we have never withdrawn a breakdown of the Soviet system. We just, instead of, getting some benefits, they said, have a peace dividend, we be spending more and more and get involved in 3, 4, 5 wars and looking for another one.
So you would, I believe, close a lot of military bases overseas? And
All of them.
all of them overseas? How much money do you think that would save?
Well, we spend, it depends on how you do it, when you do it, where the troops go, when you cut down and downsize. But we do know that it's about 1.4 trillion we spend on maintaining our militarism. And I don't call that defense. Military expenditures has very little to do with defending our country. It seems to get us into more trouble, by just getting involved over there. And I guess we're well over $1 billion in Libya, undeclared, no consultation with the Congress, under NATO resolutions, totally out of control.
So would you close military bases in the United States also?
I think eventually, but I wouldn't do that now. I'd bring all those troops home and let them spend their money here. That'd be an immediate boost to the economy. Bring them home from Japan and Korea, Germany, and Middle East, and put them in these bases here. But then I do think it should be downsized. But I wasn't in the Congress when they did those base closings in the 90s. I was opposed to it. It was one of these commissions that set up, and Congress doesn't have the temerity to actually go do their job. So they said, this is commission, we'll do what the commission tells us. I was opposed to that because I didn't think the process was right. But why are you closing bases down here? Even though you could argue, well, they're not serving that much of a function. I could accept that argument. At the same time, we're building them up overseas. That was the time we were expanding bases in Saudi Arabia and these different places. Just made enemies to build bases overseas. Just think of what we're building in Iraq today.
So we don't need a single base anywhere on the planet except
What do
for...
we need them for?
Well, others would say defense, right?
I mean, we're just getting killed over there and shot at and wasting our money. No, there's no authority for it. There's no authority for us to be the policemen of the world. And it's an absolute waste. Gets us involved in these wars. And this is where the American people are. This is where I'm getting the most acceptance now, both on the monetary issue and the foreign policy and the militarism. And I can quote quite a few Republicans on this too, because they think only liberal Democrats believe this kind of stuff. No, but Eisenhower and Robert Taft and H.R. Gross and all these people back in those days argued against all this militarism, and it's a racket. It really is. All these expenditures they're making, billions and billions of dollars of building weapons we don't use, still dealing with airplanes with jet engines that fly around, and which engines are we going to use? Well, we can't agree, so let's give them 2 engines. Let 2 companies build them.
But I
They
think
own us.
Republicans would argue, most of them would argue that creates millions of jobs also.
That's
so
called-
if you eliminate these
Yeah,
expenditures.
and that's called military Keynesianism, and other people believe in domestic Keynesianism. I don't believe in any Keynesianism, but conservative Republicans, are wrong on that issue. And what you see is you say, And the argument goes, well, we're going to build this weapon, and we're going to have 5,000 people here, and the unions can get their extra pay, high pay, companies making money, and you say, isn't this an economic benefit? Well, no, it isn't. Because let's say we're building cruise missiles or something that we take, somebody made some profits, there's war profits. We take the bomb or the plane or helicopter, take it overseas, it gets blown up. The GDP went up, but the American people had less money to spend. The money that gets blown up overseas, it didn't help education, it didn't help medical care, somebody had some war profits, but there was no new houses and no better education, there are no benefits, the standard of living didn't go up. So you have to look at what you see on the surface, jobs here, but and that's easy. I think your argument is politically, you'll be good in politics. Politics are easy because you say, look at what I do, I'm going to have this job, I'm going to create jobs, or I'm going to build this, this housing for the poor. Oh, that's good. But then you say, where might that money have been spent? Maybe it would have created a more productive job. And maybe this won't last very long. And it doesn't raise standard. The most dangerous thought right now comes from people like Paul Krugman, who says and believes that war is an answer to depressions. And that you can spend this money. And he says, well, just look. Unemployment rates went down with World War II. But they drafted 16 million people, and people got killed. The country got poorer. I remember it. The war times were bad. No cars, nothing. Rationing. You couldn't go out and buy a pound of butter without rationing stamps. The standard of living went way down until finally the debt was liquidated. That was accumulated over those years. And finally the soldiers came home. They slashed spending. Spending went down. Spending was cut more than half drastically, and taxes went down drastically. Tax revenues went down, a third. And because the debt had been liquidated, they could go back to building again. And that's where the Depression actually ended about 1947.
I want to go back to that 10-to-1 deal you guys were offered. I've been thinking about it all week. And what struck me, beside the specifics of that deficit reduction proposal, what struck me was American people watching the debate saw all of you raise your hands, and I wondered if they wouldn't have seen you all as uncompromising, and whether you think is that a good quality and a precedent?
Absolutely. Why should I? When you come up to me and you say, oh, there is a First Amendment to our Constitution. Do you want me to be a compromiser and say, well, I want prior restraint on occasion. I want you to come in here because you might say something bad about me.
I don't think that's the same thing as reducing different ways to reduce the deficit.
No, it's absolutely saying you're talking about compromising. And I think believing in something, I think counterfeiting money is compromising. Paper money is bad and gold money is good. So we compromise and say, well, we'll wean ourselves off. That is a compromise that is devastating. So property rights, okay, we'll have property rights unless we have eminent domain come in and take your property, give it to a big corporation. That's a compromise. That to me is, but what you want, see, I use another term. I work coalitions to bring people together. Compromise, you're supposed to bring people together. So I work with the left probably better than any other Republican because I talk to the Dennis Kuciniches of the world, and Bernie Sanders, and they understand foreign policy, they understand corporatism, and they understand the corporate welfare. So these are the issues. They understand civil liberties. They understand my position on the Patriot Act. So I work with them to fight some of these battles. But they don't have to sacrifice any principle. I don't ask them to sacrifice principle, but I don't have to sacrifice principle. That is the way you solve the problem.
That's called my way or the highway.
Oh, come on. But my way or the highway? So you're criticizing Bernie Sanders for saying it's his way or the highway?
No, I'm talking about legislation.
Well, no. I mean, you pass legislation because you bring people together. Right. I can't see how you could write it off so casually.
No, you're saying no compromise. So wasn't.
Well, I made my point. Do you think I should compromise on the First Amendment? On property rights, on your property rights? Should I sell your house because a businessman wants it and he can pay more taxes? Why don't you want somebody to stand on principle? Why?
So then tell me how you have used that stance to pass significant legislation with bipartisan support. What bill, what can you put
Okay, I
your
have a good example, at least through the House of Representatives.
No, I'm talking about into law.
Well,
Have you
under
passed
the
anything?
circumstances that I'm trying to repeal a lot of bad ideas of about
Right.
100 years, just holding the line is a major achievement. This day.
Right.
But give me the benefit of getting something passed in the House.
No, into law.
No,
President,
I haven't because there's too much misinformation. Too many people have learned Keynesian economics. Too many people believe in big government. Too many people believe in more taxes. Too many people don't care about personal liberties. Too many people compromise and say, well, we have to give up some of our freedoms to be safe, so that's why we need the Patriot Act, and that's why we need the TSA agents prodding and probing and x-raying us. So that's all a compromise that we don't need. But let me give me my example, even though you won't accept it. Last year, we had the bill to audit the Federal Reserve. And Barney Frank worked with me and helped me to get it passed in the House of Representatives. But it was Republicans and Democrats that came together. Now, what is so terrible about that? See, I don't understand how that could be criticized and say that, oh, no, that's uncompromising. But no, you bring people together with like-mindedness, and this whole idea that there's this rigid right and a rigid left, and they can't talk to each other, and they yell and scream at each other. Well, why aren't there issues that we can come together on the war and civil liberties and the monetary policy? I had a coalition put together outside of the Congress, including Ralph Nader and the Green Party and everybody else, excuse me, agreeing with me that we ought to have a balanced budget. I think it's fantastic,
Right.
and also attacking the Federal Reserve, civil liberties, and foreign policy. We had a group, Libertarians, Conservatives, Ralph Nader, and Green Party, and they agreed on a statement I wrote up.
Here's my concern, and I think a lot of Americans' concern are that the lack of the willingness to compromise. This country was founded on some really horrible compromises, whether it was about
Right.
slavery.
Good point.
And it wouldn't have existed had they not made some pretty tough compromises.
See,
And you're not willing to
I
do
would
that.
have never compromised on the slavery issue. I think you make my point, because we did that. We did the compromise, and we became, relative value on rights. We say, well, we'll sacrifice this whole principle. And what did it do? It led to a civil war. So they should have stood firm.
And then there would have been no United States. So you're okay with that?
And we would have had, a loose-knit group of states that may have come together later on. But why give up and plant the seeds of disaster?
So-
I mean, just think of the harm done because of that there was relative value.
I'm not arguing that it's good.
Oh, I
I'm
know,
just saying that
but you're arguing
democracy-
the case for compromise.
No, for democracy.
Yeah, democracy is very dangerous because that's mob rule. If you get 51%, then your rights become relative. 51% come and vote and say, well, we can do anything we want. How do you protect
So you
them?
think democracy is dangerous?
Well, yes, it's dangerous because 51% rules. That's how the minority gets cheated. You always have to, in a free society, you have to protect the minority. But why should the 51% said slavery? I mean, that's horrible. So no, to protect the minority, you cannot say that the majority can dictate rights. That is very, very dangerous. And the founders were very, very clear on this. They said, we don't even want a democracy. We want a republic. And it is extensively written how dangerous they considered a democracy, that 51%. And de Tocqueville, pointed this out as well, that it would be the dictatorship of the majority. The majority, when they're wrong, are very dangerous.
So you get elected president. How are you going to get anything done?
Building coalitions,
Without compromise.
arguing on principle and showing that an uncompromising position of bringing troops home and a sensible foreign policy is the best thing for this country.
So how has that worked for you in all of your time in Congress?
Well, Well, that doesn't discredit the views if I'm right and correct and they're good
No,
views.
just effectiveness. I don't, whether you're right or wrong.
Like I say, you know, when you're trying to reverse 100 years of history and 40 years of a bubble being blown up that's bursting now and that's devastating to our whole country, well, no, we haven't achieved it. But right now, people are paying attention. That's the important point. They really are.
Do you have any hope for the super committee, so-called, to move this forward at all?
The super committee?
Yeah, on the
I'm
economy
not
and
very
jobs.
optimistic about that. I mean, why should we listen to 12 people? Well, where are they going to get their wisdom? Somebody did a study, and all I'm going to do is quote the study because I haven't done this. I haven't done it and checked it out. But they said all 12 had some relationship to the military-industrial complex. So are they going to cut any military? No way, no way. So, but I don't approve of the committee. But where is their wisdom going to come from? You know, and I just not very optimistic about that because they're not going to deal with how bad the debt problem is.
I think from your point of view, unless we deal with the debt problem, we can't move forward. But right now, corporations are sitting on trillions of dollars in cash and not spending it, not hiring. What, as president, would you do to get them to invest in the economy?
You have to change the environment, and they feel very negative about the environment. They're worried about the future. Everybody's worried, but this is characteristic about what a recession and depression is like. People lose confidence. And it's the restoration of confidence, and it's no easy task, there's no doubt about it. But my belief is that you have to do what I've been talking about. Change the monetary policies, change the spending policies, and liquidate debt, and change the foreign policy, the whole works. Otherwise, and people have to believe you're going to do it. But writing more regulations and more taxes, this is why we did it in the Depression. And Republicans and Democrats have done it. They write more regulations. They see that the bubble is a consequence of not enough regulation. And it's just not true. And therefore, they don't allow this correction to occur, which is a necessity. So the market will liquidate the debt, unfortunately, unless we did what I'm suggesting, and that is cut all the unnecessary spending, starting with militarism, corporate welfareism, subsidies to rich farmers, the whole works.
I'm with you on some of those at least, but how about on the entitlements that are Medicare particularly and Medicaid, but what would you do in those areas?
Well, you know what, as much as I see those programs as being poorly chosen at the time because it would lead to a bankruptcy, and it has. There's no money in Social Security, so nobody, no matter how much you love it, it's not there anymore. The money's all been spent on wars and other things. But I'll tell you what, I've done more to preserve Social Security than anybody else because I have never spent one penny of Social Security money. I would say you've got to keep it there. You've got to be responsible. It's an insurance program. I want the money to be there. I've introduced legislation. No, it didn't get passed, but it's there. That's the program. That money would have been there. We wouldn't have had this crisis. My other answer to it, because I do have deep concern about child health care and the dependency of the elderly. So soon we're going to have runaway inflation, and nobody's going to have anything. So that's one option. The other option is doing what I suggest, and that is cut where I want to cut. Now, if I could cut, $50 billion, the first year from militarism, I'd put $25 billion against the deficit, and I would shore up any program where we have taught people and they have become dependent on their health care and the elderly. Because you can't take the elderly and all of a sudden, okay, you go back to work and save your money. That's not going to happen. So I have a way, but not one person, Democrat or Republican, are willing to cut that military money. That's the problem.
Gates is.
Huh?
Gates is, former Secretary.
That's right. And he said anybody who's wanting to start a new war who needs their head examined. So I'll tell you what, there's a room for a lot of psychiatrists down there in Washington. Because a lot of people are itching at the bit for another war, whether it's Libya or Iran or wherever. And then with the Krugman argument, that war gets you out of depression. This is dangerous. This is dangerous at the height of this type of crisis. But believe me, I have concern. I have my philosophical positions. I know I'll never see it, but I know where the goal should be, and I know where you should strive for. And therefore, you have to start moving in that direction. So I have my priorities, and that would be not one of my priorities for cutting.
So would you not look to change the rules, the eligibility rules, the generosity of the programs?
I would look at that. I think so, because it's not truly an insurance program. We might as well admit it's welfare.
Medicare, you mean?
Pardon me?
Medicare, you mean?
Well, in a way, that is a transfer payment, and even Social Security. I argue we should run it like an insurance company and only buy negotiable securities and not just give it to the government to spend on these other programs, and try to have real value there. So.
So would you privatize Social Security, or?
I would let young people get out of it, because I don't like this idea of some of those descriptions of privatizing it. I think that's another invitation for government and corporations to get involved. I mean, what if they change the rules and say, well, you can buy this particular stock but not this other stock? And that to me is too dangerous. You get too close to the corporations.
But you would allow young people to just opt out of it altogether?
I think so. I think that would be the best way. I haven't said what year and what date or anything, but that's what I would advocate. And believe me, I can go to the campuses and I don't get just 20 or 30 people out. I get a lot of people out. That's one of the loudest applause lines. They know there's no money there, and they will assume responsibility for themselves, and they would invest on their own. So I would say, I would say it's necessary right now because the money has been used up. The only thing that we can go for now is trying to preserve some of this, and that means, back to your question about how to clean it up. No, I think somebody, even though we're supposed to be entitled to it because we paid into it, but the money has been spent. So therefore, I think that changing of the rules, maybe the people are making $10 million a year, or we don't need to be still taking care of their Social Security benefits. Yeah, that was funny. One time, many years ago, I was watching an interview with Warren Buffett, and they said, do you get Social Security? Yeah.
But he's calling for higher taxes on people like himself.
Yeah. I liked his father's politics a lot more than his.
Would you, like the other candidates we've heard from, seek to repeal Obamacare, as it's called, the healthcare reform?
Yeah, I didn't vote for it. And
is that a priority to get rid of it at this point?
I don't have that. I mean, it's no, not on my top priority, but it's one. But a real top priority for me, and anything I deal with, is the opt-out principle. You know, whether it's the public school system, you have to have a right to opt out. You have to have a right to go to private school or homeschooling. Once you close those doors, we're in big trouble. And monetary policy, I want you to opt out and have real money. Medical care, I'd like to see you opt out. To be forced into that program and support, that program was basically written by drug companies and insurance companies. Organized medicine, too, was very much involved. So it's the corporations the corporations are making the money on this. And the worst part about all that, and I went through the transition. I practiced medicine when there was no government involvement, and then when there was a lot. But it destroyed the doctor-patient relationship is what's happened. I mean, it is, and that'll get a lot worse, you know, to this sort of a wedge been driven.
How would you bring healthcare costs under control?
You have to get rid of the inflation. That's the #1 cause of high prices.
But we don't really have much right now.
What, inflation?
Yeah.
Well, the cost of medicine is going up.
Oh, yeah. Medical inflation's crazy.
We had inflation in houses. We had inflation in education. Just because the government says there's only 2% inflation, CPI, they deceive us because they use new figures. If you go to the old figures, it's 9%. And right now...
But healthcare specifically, what would you do for competing hospitals, everyone buying MRIs or spending...
Well, they do that because the government's providing the funds. It's malinvestment. It channels money over there. And the more money you put into something, you don't get higher quality, you just have more expenditures. In education, a lot of money has gone into education, just like in housing. So inflation, if everybody's prices went up and wages went up the same, printing money wouldn't be a big deal. But it always hurts the poor, it always wipes out the middle class, pushes some prices up at the expense of others. Big corporations, the banks benefit, politicians benefit, but eventually the poor, like the best example is how the inflation and the spending plus inflating the currency bailed out Wall Street and the mortgage companies and the derivatives markets. It was dumped on the American taxpayers. Now we own that debt. And what happened to middle class? Many people lost their jobs. They lost their medical care. They lost their houses. So all this wonderful effort to take care of people just really didn't work. And it's...
Although the Congressional Budget Office would say it saved 3 million jobs.
What, 3 million jobs what?
That the stimulus, the TARP, that there would have been, there's 9% unemployment, it would have been 12 or 15%.
There might have been a couple jobs created, but what are they doing? Are they doing the right thing? Are they spending the money the right way? Did they invest it in a new company? Did we get new businesses in our country?
Corporations are doing fine. Profits have never been higher.
That's right, but the environment is bad. They don't invest. It's the destruction of confidence that is happening because of this worldwide bubble. And the bubble is every currency, their base, their reserves are held in paper money, and there's no reason to have confidence in that. They're skittish.
I think there's a really quick caricature that we often see of the Tea Party, which is both activists on the outside and some of the people who got elected in the last wave at the federal level and at the state level all over the place is really angry, really extreme, perhaps uninformed. Is there any truth to the sort of cartoon version of the Tea Party that we often get?
Not a whole lot, because of course, attended a lot of these meetings, but you're going to get oddballs in about any group you ever see. And since this is a spontaneous group, and anybody can declare they're Tea Party people that they want, so you're going to see that. But you can go to Republican and Democratic rallies and find a few oddballs too. But to pick out a few and say this represents them, I think is not fair.
What's been, in general, the effect of the Tea Party, people who call themselves members of the Tea Party, on the public debate and on politics in the country?
Well, I think it's called the attention to an important issue, and that is the debt, because they know that the debt is unsustainable, and I think that's the biggest thing. But you know, the Tea Party movement, of course, started during our last campaign, and we had very precise viewpoints involving monetary policy and foreign policy and corporatism and all this corporate welfare that went on. So, but when there was an explosion of Tea Party sentiments, and actually people who moved in to sort of get hold of all that, they wanted to set the agenda for the Tea Party people. But it's very amorphous. I mean, there's so many different views that I think that it's hard to say that the Tea Party people have a list of things that they believe in. I know what I believe in, and I know what the supporters believe in, but the only thing that seems to bring them together was the insurmountable debt and what it's costing us just to pay the interest on the debt, and watching these other countries going bankrupt. I think that's been the unifying issue.
Can we switch to climate change? I believe you are a skeptic.
Yeah. Well, no, I think there's a lot of climate change.
Do you think man has
a little bit, but I think nature has a lot, and trends. I've always wanted to be really sympathetic, but I've had trouble because I read both sides of the story, and I think there's pretty good science on both sides of the argument, that nature and trends and cycles and things like when people produce a bunch of names who are very worried, and I don't blame them for being worried if they think there's a crisis, that in the 1970s they might have been very concerned about the new ice age, and now they're on the other side of the issue. That makes me wonder. But one other thing, I saw a debate once between two individuals that were really concerned about this, and they were talking about it, and they came up with a conclusion that made me wonder. And they said, because most people say it's all CO2, you know, CO2 emissions, and that's why we're having it. But their conclusion was, and they were very serious, and they said that CO2 is not it. It's methane gas. And if we could just get the American people to kill every cow in the country. No, I'm serious. And I
Ronald Reagan's theory, kill the trees.
Kill the trees. So that lost a lot of credibility. But
so you don't think the government should be doing anything to
well,
clean
sure.
up pollution or eliminate
well,
CO2?
I think if you polluted
emissions?
something, I don't think he should be taxed to clean up your pollution. No, I don't think that. That's generally what's happening. But no, yes, I want to do a whole lot about it, but I'm convinced that if we understood, back to our original talk about this, if you understand true property rights, people are not allowed to go to bed together with government and get pollution legalized. And some of this cap and trade stuff is actually legalized. Well, I'm going to buy a permit from you so I can pollute so much. I don't buy into that. If you're polluting, it's wrong. You shouldn't do it. And people should call you on it.
Is it reasonable to, there's a coal-powered electricity plant near Concord, and there are people who live near it who have claimed for years that the pollution is horrible and it's affecting their health. I mean, if it was all about just suing, what's the chance that some poor guy living near the power plant?
But I understand they can burn coal pretty well these days.
Yeah.
Nothing like when I lived in Pittsburgh. I'll tell you, we couldn't even see the sun in Pittsburgh because the skies were so bad. So if there's some pollution there, somebody's going to have to sort it out. There has to be some type of a class action suit or something to find out if it's really true. But that one's more difficult than when you see them literally dumping billions of barrels of sewage into a river. That's pretty easy. And dumping poisons into the rivers, into our lakes, or into our air. I mean, it's pretty easy. Now, that one must be more difficult. Do you see big black smoke pouring out of there? Probably not.
Yeah. You got some attention the other night in the debate for your comments on Iran, this notion of encouraging a policy of respect and suggesting perhaps we shouldn't have any role in trying to stop Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. Can you just talk more about that? It seemed like at least some of your colleagues on the stage were alarmed by what you had to say.
Well, they indicated that they were ready to go to war to stop the Iranians from developing a nuclear bomb.
Mm-hmm.
And I said I wouldn't do it. Why do it? I was drafted. I was in the military for 5 years in the 60s. And I was actually drafted because the Soviets were putting missiles in Cuba, a rather serious problem. And I thought, under those circumstances, it was pretty dire. But what did Kennedy do? He actually calls up Moscow and says, let's do something here. And they had a little talk, and Kennedy says, yeah, I'll take my missiles out of Turkey. Not a bad idea, so he backs off. So if we can solve a problem and work with it, and guys like Reagan and all these people talk to people who have been, like the Chinese and Russia, the Soviets, killed millions and millions of their people, and they were able to talk to them. Last time I read history, it's been a long time since the Iranians invaded another country. The last time they were in a war is when we had Iraq, our ally at the time. We encouraged them to invade Iran. So I would say that the build-up, the hysterical anti-war sentiment is just war propaganda because people want to go to war against them. So I don't want them to have a weapon. I don't even like nuclear weapons. I don't even like conventional weaponry. That's a different story. But there's no evidence for the bomb being built. Our CIA has no concrete evidence. They have not confirmed it, nor has the UN confirmed that they are actually working on it. But I also made the point, wouldn't it be reasonable to assume that they might like one because they might feel a little safer and secure in being attacked, because they're always being threatened that somebody's going to attack them. And I think there's a balance of power between the Pakistani and the Indians. I think it'd be worse for Pakistan maybe to have it, or just India have it. They might get a little bit too rambunctious. So I don't think, considering what we went through with the Soviets, no, I don't think it's worth us starting another war, like Gates said. Another war.
Speaking
You better
of
get your
Iran,
head examined.
What would you do if Israel was attacked?
I'd let Israel take care of it. They have 300 nukes, and they've done it before. And I think we should not interfere with Israel like we do. At times they want to do things around their borders and deal with their enemies, and we're telling them, no, don't do that, that's too much. Sometimes they want to sign peace treaties and negotiate things. Oh, you can't do that. So they sell out too much to us. They depend on us for money and weapons.
Do you think we shouldn't give them the money and weapons?
No, we don't have any money.
Well, the weapons.
No, why should we? Because when we do, I want to stop them all around. So the enemies of Israel get 7 times as much as Israel gets. So if we cut it all off, we really help Israel. But this idea that you keep building and building and having the balance of power by us being on both sides, I mean, just look at us propping up Mubarak and all these countries, and their dictators finally fall, and we're really resented by some of the extreme Muslims for propping up governments in Saudi Arabia. I mean, that base in Saudi Arabia was a major precipitating factor, motivation for 9/11. The fact that we, do these things. So I would say no, it's not in our interest. We should be friends. We should trade with Israel, and I think they would be better off for us rather than us telling them what they can do or can't do.
Should we be friends with all countries, or do you have lines?
Anybody who wants to be. I mean, if Reagan set the standard and Nixon set the standard, and you can talk to China and talk to the Soviets, I would say that if they're open to it, talk to somebody before you start killing each other. So,
but in terms of trade friendships, we should be trading with countries, places like
if you
Sudan.
trade with them, you're less likely to fight with them. And people have a right to spend their money where they want. That's a moral right. And it's good politics too. We should have been trading a long time ago with Cuba. I think all we did was prop up Castro by having these embargoes and not even allowing them to send gifts to their family down there. So
I'm not talking so much about places where we have political differences, but places where the regimes who are in charge are actually committing atrocities against their own people. We should just acknowledge them as any other country.
I don't think our business is making that judgment, and I think if we traded with them, it would be more help than harm. But what we do is we do get involved with these countries that are always fighting, and we pick one faction over another, and we send them money and food. It becomes weapons of war. So no, the trade is much more, market-oriented. They go in there, and people will want to, maybe they'll like what they're getting. I say, well, why aren't we more like the Americans? Look at what they have and look at what they can do. But to bring down a regime, it doesn't work.
Did it work in South Africa? Didn't
Well,
that sort of economic
they claim that, but I think time was right, but that might have, but I don't think it justifies trying to pick and choose all these factions, and because once you're doing that, you become the policeman. You become judgmental. You have to be the investor. You have to restrict somebody's right to do something. No, I don't think it's. I don't see any place where we get this authority. We can defend our country, but we're not told that we have to decide exactly when to interfere in the internal affairs of other nations. That's what we were precisely instructed not to do. No internal affairs. Don't get involved in the internal affairs of other countries. And I think that's a great plan. And I know there's other problems with civil liberties and But do we have a perfect society here? I mean, what if they point out some of our infractions? What if they decide that, oh, you know, this administration has announced that they can assassinate anybody in the world when they want to? What if they decided, that's a horrible position. We're not going to even talk to the United States anymore. We're not going to trade with them because they have this program of assassination. It's even assassinating American citizens. They've admitted to this. So that's pretty bad. So, well, I don't want people coming down and dictating to us. That's our problem. We should deal with it. But I don't want China coming over here and telling us that we ought to repeal this particular rule because they don't want to deal with us. So no, I think it just invites trouble.
The last time you ran, you talked about the NAFTA superhighway. Do you still believe that there's a conspiracy to do that?
No, I didn't use that word, I'll bet. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Everybody conspires when you talk, you know, I guess. So I guess I'm a conspirator in that I'd like to conspire for liberty. It's still there. It's still there. But Perry got stopped because the state legislature voted it down. But I think those plans are there. They come and go, and this is a superhighway slashing up. I don't know how many lanes it's going to be, 8 or 16 lanes and railroads, and you can't cross it, but except every 300 miles.
And I'm confused. Who's doing this?
Well, the NAFTA was making the plans for it, but Perry was pushing it for the Texas corridor. He wanted to get it started. So the plan was laid out, the NAFTA people had laid it out from Mexico to Canada.
But Rick Perry was part of the...
He liked it, and he was voted down on that.
Have you been to China? I just imagine a group of Chinese businessmen listening to you and racing to withdraw their money. I wonder what that would do to the
They will.
global
You mean
economy.
getting out of the dollar?
Right, yeah.
They've started. They're
Because
spending
we are
it. You know what they're doing? They're taking our dollars. We're over there fighting and killing in Afghanistan, and they're actually investing in Iran and in Afghanistan.
And here.
Yeah, so they're doing what we used to do. I mean, it's sort of ironic. We were over there in Vietnam because we were afraid of the domino effect. Guess what? We lost, and the domino effect was that the free market grew over there, and it's been diminished over here. It is really ironic.
I saw a column by some smarty pants columnist last night, and the headline said, 3 reasons Ron Paul will never be president. And I thought it was going to be somebody who didn't like your politics, and his number 1 reason was he's too old. 75 people won't vote for someone as old as you. Do you think that's a real concern to have?
That's an old-fashioned idea.
I don't know how old the writer was.
In this day and age, I think it doesn't hold much. And I tell people that, what really counts are your ideas, and I think my ideas are promoting liberty, and that's a very young idea, and young people love it. But I also challenge them physically. Anytime any other one in Canada wants to come to Houston at 12 o'clock noon, when the temperature is 100 and the humidity is 102, I'll ride 20 miles with them on a bicycle.
Oh my God, you win.
And so I think that's, silly argument.
People have other questions?
I have one. Congressman, your opposition to the wars is pretty well documented. Have the soldiers
Okay, I'm not quite hearing it.
Have the soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan died for nothing?
That is a really, really tough question to answer. In many ways, it could be that way. And I think about both what Reagan said after the troops were lost in Lebanon, and he wrote about it. He said he'd never turn tail and leave, but he did. And he said in his memoirs, he said that he didn't realize the irrationality of the politics of the region. If he had, he would have advocated a more neutral position. He would have followed neutrality. He used those 2 words. He says, if I had done that, he says, those Marines would have still been alive, which means that his policies were wrong. He admitted it. We had to change policy. When McNamara wrote his memoirs, and before he died, about he had to try to reconcile, his support for the devastation of Vietnam. And somebody asked him, he says, do you want to apologize, for what you've done? And he says, what good is an apology? He said, But if you don't change your viewpoints, if you don't understand history, you don't change your viewpoints, you know, that is the only thing that counts. So yes, they will have died in vain if we don't wake up and decide that it was a useless war. We thought we learned our lesson in Vietnam, but it's constant, it's endless, it's killing, it's bankrupting us. And the real tragedy is that men who go over there and women who go over there and lose their lives, if we don't learn something, it sadly is a lost life. And so I'm hoping and praying that we can get a message out, that we can learn a lesson. And this is where I get so much support from the young people and the military people. We constantly get letters about you're right on this. And they and they do it by donations. We get more money from the military than all the other candidates put together. So that to me, they know that I'm on their side and that these wars are useless. And I just think that the momentum is building on this. 10 years, that's enough. It's a sad story that it even got this far along. How many more years are we going to do? Are we going to fight for victory for another 5 years and then decide how many more people have to die before we wake up and admit that these people should not have died, you know, and with a proper policy, as Reagan said, if we'd have only had the proper policy, those Marines would still be alive today.
But you thought it was right to go after bin Laden in Afghanistan initially, right?
Yes. In Afghanistan, I voted for that authority, but also shortly thereafter, I did two things. I introduced the resolution to reinstate letter of marque and reprisal, you know, to narrow the target. Then I gave a speech, keep your eye on the target. But that was when Bush went from Afghanistan. And before even asking Congress, he took funding from Afghanistan and put it into Iraq. Right. And that's when things just deteriorated, you know, and now, but that authority didn't say that you should take over Afghanistan and go into nation building and all the things we did. The authority was to go after the Al-Qaeda, the people responsible for that. But there's one piece of legislation passed this year that it's not going to be important politically because it's probably considered too esoteric. But in our DOD budget this year, we had a section called Section 1034, and it took the definition of what we endorsed to go after Al-Qaeda, and they expanded very casually, a few words changed it, and they said Al-Qaeda, Taliban, and associated forces. And the associated forces and their definitions in there, and it's anybody in the world. It's an open, it literally legalizes, say Libya. He doesn't have to come because we said anybody who may be related to in any way. But also, many civil libertarians have read this and they said, yes, if you happen to be sympathetic to a Muslim mosque or something, and you put some money in there, and some reason they say, well, we're suspicious that this mosque might be helping, you know, a loose connection, that you could actually be targeted as a terrorist. I mean, it is very, very dangerous. Actually, we did a pretty good job. I co-sponsored an amendment to repeal that, and the vote wasn't too bad. You know, we lost it, but at least it came out pretty close. But I think that is a very significant piece of legislation because they generally have ignored the declaration of war anyway. When I fought this thing about going to war in Iraq, I said, look, if you guys want to go to war, I'm not going to vote for this, but I'm going to put a resolution up here, declare war, win it and get over with it. And they ridiculed me and they said, oh, that part of the Constitution is anachronistic. We don't deal with that anymore. That's old-fashioned to declare war. Well, then they should repeal it. Say the king declares war, not the people.
How important is religion and your faith to you? It could be easy to hear you speak about Austrian economics the way some of your opponents speak about biblical morality. Do you pray about your decisions before you make them, or do you? Well,
I have a very strong faith. I believe in prayer. And my statement is that I think it's been written down, I have it on a webpage, that I don't carry religion on my sleeve. I think it's very personal. If you're interested in my religious values, I think it's important. If you're thinking about voting for me, you have a right to know, but I don't feel comfortable campaigning on it because I don't think that brings people together as much, thinking that I'm moralistic in that sense. I can be a very moral person, but you should judge me by how I live and what I do and what I believe in, you know, and what my family values are. So, and I think that is a reflection of my religious values.
But you don't believe in separation of church and state, or do you?
Well, that's a broader subject. Church and state issues not addressed in the Constitution. What is addressed is you don't have a theocracy, and I believe in that. I believe that you should not have a theocracy.
Right.
But as far as church and state goes, the First Amendment gives us a pretty hard hint to Congress shall write no law. Write no law. There's no prohibitions. There's no prohibitions.
So it's
to,
okay to have prayer in school or to have...
I think so. Of course,
whose prayers?
You know, yeah, that's gets to be a problem. You see, in the perfect libertarian society, you don't have government running so much, so you don't have these debates. Because, you know, it's your homeschooling, it's your private school, it's your church school, and you say prayers or whatever you want. That is solved. But then the public school, it becomes a little more ticklish on what to do. The federal government has no authority to tell your public schools whether you can have a prayer in school or not. I don't believe that for a minute, because the Congress shall write no law regarding
Even if
that.
it's, say, a Christian prayer or...
Yeah, well, that's where the problem comes in.
And excludes everyone else.
I was raised in a public school where they read the Bible and said prayers and all, but there was no competition, you know, in religion. Everybody was Christian. So, but that is the question. So how do you do it if I don't want the federal government coming down here and saying thou shalt not? You can't even say a prayer before a football game, and you can't do it at a baccalaureate and all that, and they put prohibitions. I think they're wrong, but sort of forcing people to listen to a prayer they might not want to, that's a different story. So if I own the school, I set the rules. You come to my school, this is a Christian school, and this is what the rules are, and we'll say prayers. But in a public school, it gets more difficult. If I don't want the federal government, the closest thing you can get as the arbiter would probably be your school district. It might be imperfect, but I would want to protect the principle that you shouldn't force people either not to be able to say prayers, or force them and say you will, you know, listen to things. And the best way you can work it out, I think, is setting up some rules with your local community. And if your community had no problems and no competition, then there's no problem. If it did, then they're going to have to work it out. And yes, there are, as wonderful as the free society is, man is imperfect, and there's never perfect answers to all this. It's just that I've lost my faith and confidence, as most Americans have now, in the government doing this. Right now, it's down to 17% of the people believe that the authority the government has been properly achieved. They do not believe what they do has been, that they have this authority coming from the people. And so that means that most people in this country are just sick and tired of it all.
I have one final question. Senator Mitch McConnell said his one goal in life is to make sure that Barack Obama is a one-term president. Would you approve of that? And do you think that it is good to put your party politics above the country?
I don't know whether those are the choices, but if I'm running for the nomination to run against Obama, how would I be able to say?
Well, did you think that?
How would I be able to say that?
If you were elected and a Democratic senator stood up and said, essentially, I'm going to obstruct everything because my goal is to make sure you're a one-term president. And I don't care what happens to the country. Do you think that's appropriate? I
would be tested to overcome that type of an attitude by building coalitions and talking to everybody, because I can talk to everybody across the political spectrum.
But is it appropriate?
I wouldn't talk like that. You know, matter of fact, there are other candidates even on our side. That's what they dwell on. But as much as I dislike the Federal Reserve, I don't dwell on Bernanke and I don't dwell on the president. I mean, if you ask me, you know, I usually say, well, I don't think he's done a very good job. But I see it philosophically that people have certain ideas, and as long as they believe these ideas, people in government will react in that manner. As long as the people endorse the idea that they're to be taken care of and we're supposed to be the policemen of the world, and printing money is a good idea, can't do anything about it. So it isn't Bernanke. To me, it's a system. It's understanding monetary policy. It isn't Obama. It isn't George Bush. It's a system on foreign policy. It's been around a long time. You know, it's a foreign policy of intervention that I challenge. So I probably slip up, but basically I try real hard to not personalize it. I don't enjoy that at all.
Because you're from Texas and running against a governor who I believe has signed more death warrants than anyone in American history. So it makes me wonder, where do you stand on the death penalty, and can you trust government to administer that?
Yeah, that's a pretty good question. Because somebody asked me yesterday, when was the last time you ever changed your opinion? And I said, well, it's been a while since I've had a major change of opinion, but I try to understand and study and figure out how things work, you know, become better at economics and all. But on that issue, I did have a change of opinion. And I stated this in the debates last go around. They asked a similar question: when did you change your opinion last? And that was just not like overnight. But my position now is since I'm a federal official, and not be a U.S. president, I do not believe in the federal death penalty. And in my book, Liberty Defined, I explain it in more detail. But basically, I make the argument against the death penalty. But I would not come and say that the federal government, the federal courts, to tell the states that they can't have a death penalty anymore. I don't go that far. But no, I just don't think the scientific evidence now to show. I think I read an article yesterday on the death penalty, and 68% of the time they make mistakes. And it's so racist too. I think more than half the people getting the death penalty are poor blacks. This is the one place, the one remnant of racism in our country is in our court system. Enforcing the drug laws, enforcing the death penalty. I don't even know, but I wonder how many have been executed? Over 200.
Over 200, I don't remember.
I wonder how many were minorities. You know, if you're rich, you usually don't meet the death penalty. So that reason, and the DNA evidence now has proven people innocent over a period of time. All this stuff just built up. Why waste the time? You know, all this, and I don't think it's a very. It's not a good sign for civilization to still be invoking the death penalty. But so nationally, I would not endorse the death penalty, and state-wise, I wouldn't interfere with it.
Thank you so
But
much.
I'd argue the moral case against it.
Thanks so much. This was great.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you on the last one.
You do?
I don't think we can progress much as a civilization as long as and discourage violence as long as we keep killing people.
I say, well,
with
if you believe in the death penalty, what I really objected to in my book are the doctors participating in torture and the death penalty. They have doctors there to make it smooth and sweet, you know. Oh, let's put him to sleep, you know. If it's the death penalty, do it on Times Square and see him get the head chopped off and see how well the people, how much they like it. Make them look at it, you know. So I think it's uncivilized. But there are some, boy, there's some pretty bad people out there.
Oh,
that
yeah,
makes
there's
it
no doubt about it.
awfully tempting, you know.
Thank you very much.
All right.